Thank you. And look, I'm really thrilled to be here, and I'm probably in the same boat as you guys, because I got back pretty late last night from spending most of the week in Canberra for the Prime Minister's Prizes for science. I was going to say sustainability. It's like, that's right, it's sustainability today, science yesterday. But I mean, it's starting to change the mood in Canberra, and we're at the PM's Prizes till all hours on Wednesday night, had 4 hours sleep, then up because there was a prize winners breakfast and we had to have the pre-breakfast breakfast to get them ready for the thing. And so I'm sleep deprived, you're sleep deprived. I'll probably giggle during my presentation, but I'm hoping that you'll get a little bit of useful information out of it. But in putting it together, I had a look at the program, and the thing that really impressed me was that there was so much tangible, practical activity that is happening around campuses around Australia. And my background is communication, but like I sort of started off my career waving a bit of a green flag. I should progress to the next slide. What do you click on? Yes. Just click? Oh, it worked. The thing that I started writing books, information dense books on how to save the planet in your day-to-day life. And then I started to go and research behaviour change for sustainability and found out that information-dense books actually aren't that useful for bringing about behaviour change. So I'd spent all these hours writing books and it might not have been as effective as I'd hoped, but never mind. I always felt that the media and popular culture was quite influential. I grew up in the 80s and Olivia Newton-John sang about dolphins and things, and funnily enough I ended up in the environmental field, so blame Olivia. So through that I'm an ex-model through that was my waitressing job while I was at university, so it was quite easy to transition into television. And so there again it was using popular culture and media to try and normalise those behaviours. But more recently, I think I've started to look at, how do the nuts and bolts of not just doing the communication, but doing the program development as well, and trying to get these things working together holistically. It's still a challenge. It still isn't happening as much as it could be based on what we know within research circles, but hopefully we're moving in the right direction. And so I think what I'd like to do today, sorry about the garbling and that sort of thing, is to try and share with you some of the things that I've learned, give you some ideas for how you might start to apply and think about the people that you're engaging. Because one thing that I've found is that we can go to universities, we can hang out with academics, and especially in the science sector, but the thing that always surprises me is that the scientists are there saying, we're the experts, we know that why aren't people listening to us? And the thing that I often say to them is, if humans were bilbies or bandicoots or whales, you would study them, you would look at the influences of behaviour, you would use animal behaviour. That's what we do in psychology and social research. So just look at humans as these fascinating species that you can study scientifically with an evidence base, and understand that just because we have the expertise and the facts doesn't necessarily mean that people are going to listen to them. And so that's why I sort of had as my title earlier, Thinking, Talking and Acting from the Head and from the Heart, because at the end of the day, a lot of the things we're talking about are about people, are about humans. Partly because in order to save the planet, we are actually saving ourselves, and also because humans are the species that has by far the biggest impact on the state of the planet. So we need to fundamentally understand these fascinating creatures called people. So that's the place that I'm coming from. Very quick overview of my career. So I've mentioned the TV bit. More recently, I've been doing a bit of consulting both in science communication and sustainability communication, partly because green was the new black and then it went out of fashion and my work dried up, so I went back to my science roots. But I do some consulting with Science in Public. They're a communications agency, and one of the clients that I look after is publicity for National Science Week. And PM's prizes, so that's why I was in Canberra. I'm an associate with the Melbourne Sustainable Society Institute at Melbourne Uni, and I'm on the teaching group for the human behaviour and environment subject there. And I'm also going to be on the advisory group for Green Steps, so I've had a little bit of involvement with Monash Sustainability Institute. And one thing I'll mention as well, yes, Green Steps is fantastic, but Behaviour Works as well at MSI has some fantastic outputs that can give you really good practical advice and case studies on behaviour change for sustainability. So I'll flag that, Google them, easy to find. So yeah, I've already really covered off that. I'm interested in communication, not just for its own sake, but how it then translates to influencing people's behaviour or not. Sometimes it's not the communication that makes a difference. Sometimes it's placing bins in convenient locations. It's the things we do automatically that can influence behaviour. So say in green buildings, for example, if you have beautifully naturally lit stairwells at the front of the building and the lifts are sort of at the back, people are more likely to take the stairwell. If you put the bike racks at a building next to the big dumpsters for the rubbish, it doesn't really convey social norm messages of we're really proud of our sustainable transport. Whereas if you have really nice bike facilities and showers that people can use, people are more likely to do active transport to and from campus. So those little kind of things, they're just that little messaging that's built into the environment, and it's not overt. People aren't aware that they're doing the right or wrong behaviour. So even though I'm a communicator by trade, I recognise that sometimes it's not even all about communication. So the question, the context, the Brundtland Commission, Our Common Future, is that a familiar concept with people? They looked at the Brundtland report looked at what we need to internationally for sustainable development. And one of the key phrases that came out of that to me is the tough choices needed for sustainable development will need the support and participation of an informed public. So the importance of information for making informed choices is part of where I'm coming from. And yet we don't always make rational choices. So this idea of humans as rational actors, just look at the health sector. We know more than we've ever known about health and healthy eating, and we've had the availability for fresh produce, we've had refrigeration, and yet we're more obese in countries like Australia and the United States than we've ever been. So despite being very aware, we don't behave as if we're aware and we're making logical choices as these high brain cognitive beings that have the capability to make good choices. We still don't do it. The other question I want to ask is, why do we believe the wrong things? Why do we fear the wrong things? That's something that I think is an important message to take away. And what are the consequences of fearing the right things and wrong things, or fear in general? Why do we do things that are bad for us? And at the end of the day, why is there so much rubbish in the media? I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. It's the context. So starting off on that first question is, we do fear the wrong things. And this is a fascinating little case study. So humans are very visual creatures. Images are very powerful. So I often ask people, which image do you find more frightening, that you have that gut reaction to? Neither are happy images. But the 9/11, the Twin Towers, planes flying into that, it was worldwide media coverage. It's one of the most iconic images. So many people have seen it. And we all had that reaction to it. We've seen media coverage of car accidents. We see it frequently. We drive past them. It's sad, but it is day to day. It's not shocking as it might have been. Well, it's certainly not as shocking as the other image. There was a study that was done, and we know, when people sit in the flight and they say, flying is safer than driving, and we all know those statistics that it is. You're not in control. You're not, you've got to trust a pilot rather than trusting your own driving skills. But we're told that. We've got that head knowledge that it's safer to fly than drive, theoretically. Yet, after all those images were broadcast, a lot of Americans thought, well, these holidays, I really don't want to hit the, I don't want to fly somewhere. I think I'm going to take a road trip this year. Yeah, family, let's get in the car and drive instead. And so some researchers did a study to see what were the road deaths above what we would normally expect, the background statistics for the normal deaths on roads. And it was a year after 9/11, there were 1,500 additional deaths. That's how much higher the road toll was than normal for that period, because more people were travelling by road to avoid what they feared might happen. So this is literally 1,500 people being scared to death, literally. So that's the kind of decision making that we make as humans. So to move on to another similar example that illustrates similar things, which images are more scary? Bushfires, like they are frightening, like they're the stuff of nightmares. A really hot day, when the media covers a heat wave, what do they play in their footage? If it's bushfires, you see that in the footage, you see that in the footage. If it's a heat wave, in the footage you see kids playing in the fountains at the city square, you see people doing all sorts of weird things to stay cool. But the imagery isn't telling you to be afraid, it isn't telling you to be cautious, it's saying, oh, it's a hot day, here's the novel ways people are staying cool. It's not treated like a serious subject. Yet in the Black Saturday bushfires, 173 people died from the bushfires, but it's estimated that that heat wave, the fortnight that led up to Black Saturday, around about 380 people died due to heat-related illness. So the people of Victoria, South Australia as well, actually had more to fear from the heat than they did from the fires. And if you live in a suburb that's built up, that's prone to urban heat island effect, and the campuses that are within central cities that are quite built up, they might have more of that. But if there's lots of gardens and lush grounds, then that will help with urban heat island effect. But even so, just that knowledge that I have more, even though I'm not living at King Lake surrounded by forest, or say the Blue Mountains, again surrounded by forest, wherever places you're from, most of Australia's capitals have bushfire prone areas very close to the city. But if you're not living in those areas, say if you're on the coast, you still have something to plan for in days of extreme heat other than bushfire. So moving on to another example, which is more scary? A shark or a mosquito? Statistically, and you've probably all seen infographics on this, far, 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 far more people have been killed by vending machines actually than sharks, I've heard, but by mosquitoes than sharks. But we are humans, we're the thing that gives us that gut reaction is the shark, not the mosquito. And yet in West Australia we had this whole shark culling policy that was driven by fear, not by evidence-based science. And most people in university circles and academic circles understand this, but we've got to understand that for our audiences that we're trying to engage, they don't necessarily understand these things. So why is this so? I think my image hasn't come, I'll see if that appears. Nope. Can I go back? Previous. I've given away my next slide. This was meant to show one of those nice, evolution of the image hasn't come through, of humans going from, ape to progressing through that. The send up of the journey of man down to the, gradually hunching over a desk again. So, they went from there to, to more upright walking tall, and then they hunched over computers. But there's a concept called the old mind, new world mismatch. And from an evolutionary perspective, change happens so gradually that humans generally adapt to it pretty well. The things that being visual creatures was kind of useful when, sort of like, saber-toothed tiger, run, like that. We are afraid of sharks for very good reasons. But we are not adapted to understand the threat of climate change. We're not adapted to understand the threat of toxic chemicals and pollution and that sort of thing. So the threats to humans have progressed and emerged so quickly that our bodies, our physiology is not adapted to telling us to be afraid of the right things, or telling us to respond to the right things, or telling us to do behaviour change. So something like climate change, what's a tonne of CO2? It's famously been referred to as odourless, colourless, tasteless, whatever it is, weightless gas. Why should I be afraid of it? And humans physiologically, we can't see it, it's not tangible, whereas if you go back through the ancient history of humans as a species, the risks were things that were tangible, that our bodies would respond. food going off would smell, so we'd go, I don't want to eat that. And that helped us survive as a species. But the threats that we have in this modern world through environmental problems, we are not physiologically adapted to recognise those risks. So it's just something to keep in the back of your mind, is that, you know, sometimes we look at people when we say, why aren't you changing? Why aren't you doing these things? It's because it doesn't inherently, intuitively make sense to them. Have any of you guys been put through the whole Myers-Briggs personality type thing before? It's just, there's so many people nod nowadays. That, I'll explain briefly, one of the aspects is intuitive types versus sensory types. And the intuitive types can think abstractly. They can look out the window, they can see the weather, they can think, this is odd for this time of year, maybe the climate's doing something weird. Whereas sensory types, they're the ones that say, I like to keep it real. You know, you think too much. They look out the window and they see the weather. They don't think about, yesterday, tomorrow, is this normal for this time of day? They go, oh, it's raining, I better get my umbrella. They're very practical, they're extremely useful people, but they find it hard to instinctively understand abstract ideas, to imagine a future, because they really need to experience something before they can understand it. And some of the people who like to study Myers-Briggs in the United States, they've statistically looked at this, and the estimates are that around about 20% of the population are intuitive. So 20% of the population, they get climate change, 80% don't. So that is the big challenge. The people who are the intuitive types, who are abstract thinkers, who can imagine a future that we haven't experienced yet, have to make it tangible and real for the people who kind of need to experience things to understand it. So things like the Black Balloons campaign. Did anyone ever see the Black Balloons campaign? Yes, a few of us were a bit involved in it. By making carbon dioxide invisible, weightless, odorless, colourless, whatever gases, visible in the form of black balloons, it turned an invisible problem into something tangible. So that's an example of how intuitive types can help our sensory friends understand this problem that is to some degree invisible. And so coming to my next one, a little bit of Star Trek. It's the way our brains operate. It's the way we function as humans, which is why I talked about, working with the head and the heart. And the way, there's an idea in psychology called dual process models, or rational versus the experiential self. And it's kind of like we've got two thinking, acting systems going on inside our brains. And the analogy for them, the symbol is Mr. Spock and Captain Kirk. So the cognitive, the one that is capable of abstract thought, the scientific mind, the Mr. Spock type. I actually did a presentation where I referred to him as Dr. Spock, and it was broadcast on the ABC, and you should have seen the Trekkies in the comments page. I got so in trouble with the Trekkies. Mr. Spock is now convinced to me. But he's the one that gets climate change. He's the one that is scientific, that is a logical thinker, that can use his higher brain and make objective decisions. Whereas Captain Kirk, he's the one that can rely on gut instinct. He knows, well, Mr. Spock might be thinking about, is this the right thing to do? He's already pulled out his gun and he's blasted the alien. And sometimes you need someone who is going to know instinctively and act really quickly, and while Rome is burning, do something, clear the people out. The Captain Kirk types, they're the ones that they are sensory. They rely on that reptile brain, that ability to respond quickly, to use that adrenaline, it's that, for want of a better word, that lower brain system that has served humanity so well. And that's the experiential self. It's really good to have both, but the thing to remember is that, who's the captain? And for most people, even the most biggest brainiacs, we can still be very emotional, we can still make sure, we can have all these biases. Humans are, we don't like to admit it, but Captain Kirk is in the driver's seat. He's the captain of the starship. And it is really, really, really good to have Mr. Spock giving advice and having that input into decision making. But humans, we are animals. We respond to things like animals. You know, you can be thinking all sorts of things, but you walk past someone who wears the same perfume as your mother-in-law and you instantly respond to, my mother-in-law is somewhere, because that smell's just processed so much faster, you know, through those sensory inputs are processed faster than those higher cognitive thoughts that we're aware of. That's just something to keep in the back of your mind. So this brings me on to something very complex. It's going to freak you out because it's a very big table, but so I've mentioned fear before, and I'll go to the simplified version of this, but I wanted you guys to be aware of what fear does, not because it explains how people behave, but also because, especially if you're working, say, in areas of campus sustainability that are related to climate change, probably less so with waste, but climate change, many people have seen an inconvenient truth. There is footage around of floods and that sort of thing. Like these are very serious problems that strike fear into the hearts of people. And so I think we have to be really aware of how fear influences how people think and feel. So I've got here in this flowchart sources of information. They come through and people do, within themselves, they appraise the threat. They think about, is this a problem or not? They also appraise their ability to do something about it. It's their coping appraisal or their estimation of what we call self-efficacy in psychology and behaviour circles. And then once they've processed, they've taken the information, they've processed it, they go to a choice of coping strategy, and that leads to their behavioural intention. They consider the barriers, and that leads to behaviour. So that's sort of the flow chart of how information gets processed and hopefully leads to the desired behavioural outcome. Sometimes it leads to an undesired behavioural outcome. And this is, to me, the most important side aspect of it. So this is how they appraise those threats and their ability to do something about it. But I've got a much simpler version of that diagram, which is this. So climate change, for example, appraised threat versus your ability to cope. Now, your ability to cope might be, well, there's a threat of natural disasters, but I'm a really good home handyman, so I can do some renovations and make sure my roof will stay on and I can do these things. Or there's going to be natural disasters, but I've got lots of money, so I can buy a really well-made house and get an architect that's a specialist to. So it's not just your ability to do stuff, it's your ability to outsource other people to do it for you in some cases as well. So your appraised threat, if you think it's not much of a problem and you don't think you can do much about it, you don't really care, you just ignore it. So that's that bottom segment there. If you think that it's not a great problem, but hey, I've got lots of money or lots of ability, I can do something about it, you say, well, I might as well act on it because, hey, I can do it, I might as well do something. So that's that might as well symbol. If, I'll go to that tick box there, so that this is a serious problem and I've got an ability to do something about it. That's the sweet spot we want people to be in for climate change. That coping mechanism is problem-focused coping. So we do things to directly address the problem. However, if we think that, gee, this problem is really serious and we're stuffed and I can't do anything about it, we turn to something called emotion-focused coping. So that instead of dealing with the problem, we make ourselves feel better about it. Denial is one of the really common things. And I sometimes think that, say, through an inconvenient truth, through people like me in the environment movement, through well-meaning saying, serious stuff is happening, we've all got to do something, we've actually scared people and pushed them into the arms of denialists. So people like Andrew Bott will say, none of this sitting here, no problem, those climate change alarmists, they're on the climate change gravy train. You know, my helicopter's parked outside, by the way. I'm still looking for that climate change gravy train, by the way. If anyone finds it, tell me. But that's the kind of emotion-focused coping is where you look for people who will make you feel better about the problem, but the problem doesn't actually go away. And I think our society is kind of in this segment at the moment, but the problem's not going away. So, but the more we talk about our ability as a society, and Australia, we are by world standards a rich nation. Now, we have the ability to adapt, to reduce our carbon impact as well. We have our ability to have better waste management systems. There are so many things that we can do in Australia that other countries just don't have those choices. We should be in that sweet spot, in that top corner of doing that problem-focused coping. So keep in mind those things, that when you're talking about the programs that you've got running at universities, that you talk about not just the problem, but you always talk about the solution as well. And you say, we can do this. Yes, we've got this challenge, but hey, this is what we're putting in place to do it. And if you get involved, you can help us do that and share the successes as well. So these things that will help people manage those negative feelings are really vitally important as we move through these things. So, moving through quickly, the context is that we're in an area where there's information overload. The internet has no quality control. Like I write books, and you had to go through, enormous, hoops to get a book published. Are you credible? That sort of thing. Are you an authority? But anyone can write a blog. So there's lots of information on the internet. It's not always factual or relevant or helpful. You can go to really good factual websites in North America that say, hey, make your house energy efficient, have south-facing windows to get natural light. So that's what I say, it's not always relevant. It might be factual, but it's not necessarily applied to the right place. The internet is global. So just be aware that when you're promoting your programs or talking to your audiences, you're not the only one that's talking to them as well. And it is really important we understand the context that information is going into. I'm running out of time, so I won't go into detail, but the cautionary tales are HIV and AIDS denialism in South Africa. There was a health minister who found natural health alternatives like beetroot juice and garlic for HIV AIDS and denied that there was a link between the two. And during the reign, for want of a better word, of that particular health minister, a Harvard study estimated that around about 300,000 people died prematurely because of that health policy. And that was partly based on the dissemination of contrarian information through the internet. Tragic, incredibly tragic, but it happens. Many health issues like anti-vaccination is another thing. There is so much information. If you Google vaccination, you'll get more hits on scary, non-evidence-based information than you will on the evidence-based stuff. Climate change, you know all about that. And the host of scams, hoaxes and swindles that are perpetuated by the internet. The other thing that we're up against is PR. Anyone ever watched Absolutely Fabulous? Yes. There's a scene where Saffron asks Adina, her mother, Mum, what do you actually do? And she's like, I PR things, people, places, concepts, Lulu, I PR them, I turn the crap into credible, I make the dull delicious. And a lot of the media, the media landscape, I said, why is there so much rubbish in the media? When I worked on Catalyst, there would be me, a producer and a researcher working on a 5-minute story. The statins cholesterol story that was quite controversial a couple of years back had one reporter who was also producer and researcher for an hour's worth of television. So there just weren't as many minds working on it because of ABC budget cuts. And that's across the board in the media, is that the media, even the journalists that want to do a good ethical job, are not resourced with the time to research things thoroughly. So there are resources like the Australian Science Media Centre that are trying to support them, but it is difficult. And there is more brand-driven content, advertorial. So people like, Adina Monsoon saying, let's, how about we give you all this PR information that you can neatly package into a story. And there is a lot of things that look like reportage, look like editorial, that are driven by PR. And so that's where some of that misinformation is coming from. Where do you come in? Respect your audience and their values. Like, yes, not everyone is the most cognitive, but they don't respond well when you say, oh, you're stupid for doing that. Like, no one likes to be told they're stupid. The pro-vaccination movement really needs to learn that. They need to stop telling concerned mothers that they're stupid. because the concerned mothers, a lot of them are very intelligent, but their hearts are there. I mean, it's no one likes seeing their child get injections, so psychologically they were prepared to be receptive to information that would confirm those biases, that is this a good thing or a bad thing. It was a predictable, from a psychology point of view, it was a predictable controversy. Encourage diversity and critical thinking. Don't always tell people they're wrong. Ask what their views are and discuss them in a constructive way. Tell stories. You know, I've often said that you can't hug a climate model. You can't. Stats are all well and good to have your case, and sometimes it's good for your conscience to know the science behind it. But if you have stories that you can tell, you know, like the Black Saturday one, that illustrate the concern, then that often helps with helping people to understand on a human level why these things are important. And tell stories, we love them. Build community and resilience. This is kind of the final thing that I want you guys to know for yourselves, and why events like this conference is so important. Because the thing that I've seen after years and years and years of being in the environmental movement, Alan will probably back me up on this, is I've seen so many people have mental health challenges. I've seen a lot of depression in the field because it is hard. It is hard to have the frustration of dealing with politicians and having those discussions with your right-leaning uncle it's difficult. And then you see the news and you see floods happening and you see all these things that you feel were preventable, and you've got to look after yourself psychologically. When you need time out, you've got to take it, you've got to look after, say, are you okay, to each other every now and then. And be aware of your own emotional limitations. I've talked about being aware of the emotional limitations of your audiences and your colleagues and your stakeholders. Be aware of your own as well, and that's something that I say, really quite seriously. I've preempted everything on my next slide is, look after yourselves, look after your audience as well. That strategically freak them out, but when you've got solutions that will encourage them rather than have them go, and want to hide somewhere. The other thing I was sort of saying, like that, look after each other, the final word goes to Tim Minchin. Sometimes you can have fun. People like fun. They respond to humour even when there's, it does help you to cope with those challenging messages. But when you're doing behaviour change campaigns, they think creatively, like they can be kind of interesting. So I'll just see if I can't get the tech expert to flip me over to... I've got a fun little something that... Go back to the start, and we'll play that. For those who've been, I was involved in the whole plastic bag reduction campaign.
Canvas bags when you go to the supermarket. Why use plastic bags when you know the world can't take it? Take your canvas bags when you go to the supermarket, yeah. Don't you use those plastic ones, no. Don't you know that you'll feel better for it? Take your canvas bags, take your canvas bags. Take your canvas bags to the supermarket. Take your canvas bags, take your canvas bags. Take your canvas bags to the supermarket. Take your canvas bags, take your canvas bags. Take your canvas bags to the supermarket. Take your canvas bags to the
I think we all need an anthem button on our wall. I think I'll close it. So that, I thought I'd let Tim Minchin have the final word, but that's all I wanted to say today really, is that we've got a lot of work to do. Sometimes it can be fun, but I think if we look after each other and we understand these fascinating, weird, wonderful creatures that we're working with called humans, then we can achieve a lot. So good luck to you all in the work that you're doing back at your universities, and thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. Always love listening to you. Has anyone got any questions for Tanya at all? Or you're all too just overwhelmed by the Tim Minchin?
You want to sing, don't you?
Just want to go out on the street. Feel free to go out there.
And just to comment on your last thing, I think that's a really important point, because you can get disheartened. And what I do is, there is a lot of really positive stuff about innovation and new technologies. Sort of like, it's incredible what people are out there developing.
Yeah.
And, the last solutions. And so I always try and sort of have a look at those every day, see what the latest is, because they're coming thick and fast. And so, I don't know if you have links to that sort of stuff on your site, but it's a good thing to put out there and remind ourselves to do it.
Oh, I need to put more on my site, but I think, on that comment, like I've been, and there's a few people in the room who are part of this, is I'm on the extended, huge judging panel for the Banksia Sustainability Awards. And the Premier Sustainability Awards in Victoria will be announced soon as well. And I find when I'm having a down day, I look at all the finalists for the Sustainability Awards. And especially the ones that are coming from sectors that you wouldn't expect. And this is one that I don't know how I feel about it, but the Prime Minister's Prize for Science for Innovation, it's a new category, came from a guy who was working in the mining sector, which, it's like, but the stuff that he's doing will mean that they can capture a huge amount of the methane that is liberated during the mining process, and that they also get more out of the ore. And it's sort of like, I still don't know how I feel about it. I still don't, I'm so confused, but the fact that he's doing that and the sector is interested, because it saves them. Like I think his technology has saved an estimated $36 billion to the industry. Like to me, it's always been screamingly obvious is that sustainability, by and large, because it's efficiency based, it makes good business sense. And this whole narrative of it's the environment versus business is just such a myth. It's such a fallacy. And so when I see that saying that I said before about, green is the new black, and then it went out of fashion, and so I went back to science communication. What I really want to see, and what we are starting to see, is green is the new normal. And that, I think, is exciting. When we do it just because it's smart, it's good business sense, it's normal, it comes naturally, that's encouraging.
Any other comments or questions for Tanya? Max.
Do you think that developing a deeper understanding as a whole community is something we can actually aim to achieve, or whether we kind of put all of our responsibility onto a few people to lead that change, and then everybody else just kind of follows, and it's this communication that you're talking about?
It's a bit of each, and that's the thing about humans, is one size doesn't fit all.
Yeah.
And I think sort of the right voices in the right places that put rules in place and that change the playing field, they can make a huge difference. But then when grassroots organisations are building up that impetus, that it's different people playing different roles in different sectors. I like to think of my father-in-law, he's lovely, he's a good person. He's a baby boomer, right-leaning. He would never vote anything other than Liberal, ever. And I am certain that his son, my late brother-in-law, worked in embodied energy analysis and carbon emissions in building materials. And the fact that Graham worked there and I work in the sustainability field. But for I take that as a sign of his love for us, that he's not a complete climate change skeptic. He would be, all his friends are, if not for that. And I sort of think, and he's a good person. And he's kind of him, and my stepmother, she's Chinese, born in China, English is her second language. Like, whenever I look at campaigns that I do or behaviour changing issues, they are never going to make a difference to those two people because they're just, well, on another planet, sort of, ideologically to me in some ways. But they are influenced by social norms. So when the whole of society shifts around them, they move with it.
Yeah.
So when council embeds, when every house has recycling bins, that kind of makes a difference, But the thing that I think we do need, and I'm not an economist, so I don't know how to make this happen, but right now it's our economic structures that are part of the problem, that profitability is tied into resource consumption. So the higher the emissions, the more we use stuff, the more profit companies make. And we are in a world that's dominated by capitalism and that neoliberal paradigm. And so the things that I think some of what we need to achieve need some paradigm shifts. And so things like the sharing economy or the ideas of natural capital, they're things that I find fascinating. I don't know how they'll be implemented, but if we start to transition from this idea of everyone needs to privately own everything to the idea that, like libraries, we can share books, like car share programs, we can still have the same services, the same quality of life, but without everyone owning everything and it sitting in garages or sitting in houses or sitting in... And that's a big cultural change. But the more we have examples of it being normalised, and sometimes for completely different reasons, like car sharing programs are often a product of density and people wanting to live in a city, and they're not necessarily led by people with green inclinations. So I don't know if that answers your question or not, but it's systems and individuals.
That was very good. What I was kind of trying to get at is whether or not people need to understand things in order to act on them. So I think people are inherently good and they're not dumb, but maybe they don't actually need to understand exactly why they're doing things. They just need to be led that way.
I think you're right. Sort of in some places, yes and no.
I wouldn't have previously thought that.
I know, me too. And you can come a long way in a few years. But I did a research project when I was doing my masters, in which I interviewed. I was looking at the transition to motherhood and how that changes mothers' attitudes to environmental issues and their behaviours as well. And the thing that I found really, really interesting, because there was some data that came out of Victorian government and New South Wales government that showed if you took out the women and then looked at women with children, women without children, then there was significant difference in self-reported environmental behaviours among women with children. So there was an argument for having babies makes you greener, even though it increases your footprint. So, sort of very confusing. But the thing is that it was in some areas and not others, and I found that fascinating. It's like, why do these things change but those ones don't? Completely untouched by it. So I used that data as a basis for interviews just to look at the language around it. And the thing that I found fascinating was recycling. The way that people, it's like, why do you recycle? Because we all recycle. And a lot of them, when they were talking about their energy use or water use or green cleaning, they use I. But when they talked about recycling, they use the term we. And that I found quite interesting. So I believe from those conversations that there is this very much, it's a social behaviour with recycling, because we put our bins out in front of our house and our neighbours do as well. And it is part of our sense of as a collective, as a society. But if you ask them, have you thought about the environmental benefits of recycling? It was one where I was fascinated because they would talk about energy and water and cleaning and transport, but recycling, it just sort of, do you do it? Yes, enthusiastically. Why? They had no explanation. There didn't need to be an understanding as such beyond it's good for the environment, it's green, and that I just found inherently fascinating. So how we translate that to other sectors is interesting. There was during the drought, it was very much, we are a water-wise nation. Then La Nina happened and that started to sort of lessen a bit. But there are some areas where, I think you're right, people don't necessarily need to understand to a depth, aside from it's environmentally friendly, that phrase that I find slightly irritating. Yeah. Any other?
I'll just take one more. Is that
What
Rory?
about that balance between a praise threat and ability to cope?
Yeah.
How much fear is too much fear?
I don't know. And it really depends on the individual. Like, you probably know amongst your own friendship groups, there's some that are, they're just hypochondriacs, they're pitched and anxious, and others that they're bulletproof. And I think to some degree, the more, and there's a bit of research about this, the more targeted and segmented campaigns are, the better they are. The more effective they are. So the research I did was looking at new mothers, and there are programs that I would happily run with new mothers because they've just gone through, they've had a child, it's a life-disrupting event, it just throws old habits out the window, which creates teachable moments to create new habits. So that's why I'd like to target new mothers. But they're scared of everything because they've got this baby that's vulnerable, and the chemicals and the bugs and the bacteria are going to kill them. And they're fed fear from all sorts of circles, so I would be very careful in how I frame things. I probably wouldn't talk about climate change at all. I would talk about, now's a really good time to spend your baby bonus on insulation so that your home's a more comfortable temperature for the baby, that kind of thing. So talking about it around really just about the solution rather than the problem, saying this is about energy efficiency and thermal comfort for a home. It's not, I wouldn't brand it as this is a carbon reduction campaign or a climate change campaign. With new mothers, I'd say this is about making your home comfortable. Similar to other groups, you find the sweet spot and where their sensitivities are. And I think one of the interesting things for campuses is that thing that I mentioned, Google it later, habit discontinuity hypothesis. That's that idea that different life events can interrupt habits and give you a chance to create new habits. Helena's nodding because behaviour work sort of, that Monash Sustainability Institute, they've put out some great speakers on that topic. But when people, international students, country students, even people in their own city, and I've seen my own daughter transition from high school to university, going to university is a disruption. It's a change in your habits and an opportunity. So you guys actually, if you work in university campus sustainability, you are working with people who have had a life disruption and they are having a teachable moment. So O weeks and those kind of things when people are in public transport education, they're all things that you're at a prime time and place to talk about the new habits. But you're also dealing with people who are probably a little bit afraid of that. I'm a grown up now and I've got to work out my timetable and where on earth am I, where do I go, that sort of thing. So not bombarding them with too much information when they've got other things they might be fearing is just something to keep in mind. So being aware of that fear and being reassuring, but I think there's enough understanding of the problems of climate change that if it's an energy efficiency program or a transport program, you don't actually have to tell them much about the problems. It's really about, we want to make it easy for you to get around, Parkville on the campus. So here's some sustainable transport options. In some cases, you don't really have to talk about the problem at all. Because that's the other thing to keep in mind is that so many of these what we call pro-environmental behaviours, for new mothers, they were pro-health behaviours. For other people, they're money-saving behaviours. So there are other reasons they will want to do them that completely bypass the things that trigger that fear.
Definitely. Ellen, I'll let you get the last one in.
The last plus
I
one.
was going to ask if there are any emotions that actually inspire people, like what emotions you might target in your campaigns or communications to get people engaged in a positive angle rather than a fear-based.
There's so much literature.
There is.
And it comes down to a question of values. That some people are egocentric, some people are altruistic, so look after your kids, look after people, humanity, and biocentric, the planet, world, that sort of thing. There is a mountain of research that talks about ecstatic experiences in the environment, the mental and psychological and emotional and general health benefits of contact with nature. They also help with work performance as well, incidentally, but you look after what you love. So people having those experiences in nature, appreciating, and in Australia we've got such incredible, iconic landscapes and places that people can visit that foster that concern for the natural environment. But the other is that, that feeling of I'm looking after my family, I'm looking after my friends, like that sort of the health. And it's that framing. It's that you can either say you've lost X dollars by buying that, or you've gained X dollars by buying that. It's glass half empty, glass half full. So instead of saying, the cars, you've reduced the pollution and by choosing that car, then it's framing it around, we're looking after our health by making sure that our diesel fuel cars have appropriate devices that without the other big devices. But so looking around and think that this is good, this is healthy by doing this rather than don't do that thing that is bad. And it's really kind of basic psychology, and it's the kind of thing that for those who have kids, that it's a similar sort of thing for positive reinforcement of desired behaviours rather than punishment of undesired behaviours tends to be more effective in that whole, operative condition kind of school of thought.
Yeah. It's so much to take in from what you've just discussed, and even the question and answer session, I think, probably illuminated many more things to consider. But the idea of being positive in your communication and understanding your audience and trying to use different messaging for different audiences is really important, and I know that we all try and do that with various levels of success. So I think the tips that you've given us today will help us on that journey as well. So thank you very much, Tanya, for coming along. Really appreciate your time this morning, particularly given your week and your lack of sleep. Please give Tanya another massive round of applause.